The smell of mildew and old paper wafted through the air, a sharp contrast to the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls I'd navigated to get here. The auction house, tucked into the gleaming corporate complex, should have felt out of place. Still, somehow it was perfectly in keeping with the strangeness surrounding it. Legend held that this building didn't exist on blueprints or city plans, and that it manifested only when the reality auction was in session. Clutching my invitation, a plain cream-colored envelope with my name in stark computer font, I pushed my way through the crowd. They were a mix of high-priced suits and raggedy figures that looked like they'd crawled out of the gutter. I didn't fit in either category. I was just an ordinary guy, jeans and a worn-out hoodie, drawn here by morbid curiosity. 1 million to start, the auctioneer's voice boomed through hidden speakers. On stage, a nondescript manila folder lay under a spotlight. What it contained was the question no one could answer. Not the brokers in crisp suits who studied their tablets, nor the whisper networks online. 1.5 million. A woman's voice, crisp as cut diamonds, rose above the din. What did that folder hold? A life where I hadn't fumbled my job interview last week? Maybe a world where my dad was still alive? The ache that squeezed my chest was almost unbearable. Then it hit me. It wasn't about a file, photo, or document inside. It was a life, a complete piece of an alternate reality, and it was for sale. A chill ran down my spine. This was dangerous. I knew it in my gut. But my common sense couldn't compete with the allure, the desperate hope that whispered, what if you could have just one thing back? 2 million, I yelled. The words felt ripped from me, as if some other force had commandeered my voice. A collective gasp cut through the crowd's murmurs. Heads whipped towards me, then to the elegantly dressed woman whose bid I'd undercut. Her stare drilled into me, burning with disdain. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly wanting to crawl into a hole. The auctioneer barely paused. 2 million to the gentleman in the back. 2 million going once, twice. My heart hammered like it was about to burst out of my chest. The room spun, my own voice roaring in my head. You'll never have this kind of money. What are you doing? 3 million. The diamond-voiced woman practically spat the number. And just like that, I was out. Relief and disappointment clashed inside me. I slumped into a worn velvet chair, head spinning as whispers of fool and what a waste drifted over me. Sold! The crack of the gavel shattered the tension. The woman strode onto the stage, her steps like a triumphant predator's. For what seemed like an eternity, her back was to us. Then, with a quick, practiced motion, she tore open the folder. Gasps and cries broke out across the room. Instead of finding papers, her hand vanished inside the folder, disappearing up to the wrist. She withdrew with the same abrupt motion. A strangled gasp tore from her lips as she staggered backward, her pristine suit soaked in a spreading crimson stain. Then she collapsed, a look of abject horror painted on her face. Guards materialized, swarming the stage. I scrambled to my feet. My only thought was to get out of there, to escape this bizarre madness. Chaos erupted. Screams echoed amongst frantic shouts. The smell of blood and panic filled the air. Somehow I shoved my way through the surging crowd, stumbling towards the exit. The auctioneer's amplified voice cut through the din as I reached the double doors. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. His usual bombastic tone was laced with a strange tremor. This is clearly an unfortunate incident, but I assure you the auction will continue as scheduled. His words were as useless as tossing a bucket of water on a wildfire. The crowd surged towards the exits, trampling each other in their frenzy to escape. I was crushed in the human wave, fear prickling my skin as elbows jabbed into my ribs. Desperately, I fought the tide, knowing if I fell, I'd be dead in seconds. I didn't look back as I burst out into the empty corridor. I ran, heart pounding, lungs burning, until the sterile walls of the complex melded into grimy urban streets. Only then, gasping for breath, did I dare to slow my pace. The invitation crinkled in my hand as I fumbled to pull it out. It still bore my name, but now beneath it, a single line of fresh text glowed in a disturbing crimson. Lot number 2, Your life. Changes pending. A wave of nausea swept over me. What had I done? What forces had I unleashed with my reckless bid? Whatever those answers were, I knew one thing for sure. My ordinary life was over. Days turned into a sleepless, anxious blur. My apartment felt like a prison cell, and an ominous silence haunted the city streets. I waited, flinching at every unexpected sound and replaying the nightmare of the auction over and over. What did that message mean? How would my life change? Then one rainy morning, it happened. I was staring at the reflection of my unshaven face in the bathroom mirror when the lights flickered. Confused, I leaned closer, and a jolt of terror shot through me. My reflection was wrong. It was still me, but older. Weathered lines etched my face I hadn't had the day before, and my eyes held a weariness I'd never seen. No, no! I choked out, stumbling backward. Had time shifted around me? I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. The date displayed froze my blood. 10 years had vanished overnight. I stared at my trembling fingers, my reflection a grim mockery. This was it, the change the auction promised. A decade of my life. Gone. In exchange for what? A better job? Luck and love? I had no way of knowing. The only certainty was the icy fear clawing at my insides. Desperation fueled me. I had to find answers, some way to reverse this, or at least understand what force I was up against. The auction might be my only lead, even if returning meant plunging back into that twisted world. When I arrived, the complex loomed as foreboding as ever, a shadowy edifice against the city skyline. Security was tighter than before. Stern-faced guards blocked every entrance, and I knew brute force wouldn't get me through. Desperate, I circled the building, searching for an alternative. Salvation came in the form of a dingy service alley littered with broken pallets and overflowing dumpsters. A chain-link fence separated it from the pristine corporate property. Still, a hastily patched hole near the ground was just big enough for me to squeeze through. I landed with a grunt, my hoodie snagging momentarily, and then sprinted across the manicured lawn. My heart pounded in my ears as I dodged towards the building, a shadowy figure against the manicured landscaping. The back entrance was surprisingly unguarded. I slipped inside, finding myself in a maze of utilitarian corridors. Following whispers of memory, I pushed deeper, my footsteps echoing eerily. Finally, I reached it, the door to the auction hall. It stood ajar and the murmur of voices rose from within. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and pushed through. The room looked normal. The bloodstains were gone and the stage reset with a fresh manila folder under the spotlight. But the crowd was different. Gone were the suits and the homeless alike. These people moved with a predatory grace, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. I shrank into the shadows, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw her, the diamond-voiced woman, the one who had bought the reality that bled. She was alive, perfectly whole, and she was looking directly at me. Her smile was a predator's baring of teeth. "Welcome back," she murmured, her voice a silken purr. "I was wondering when you'd return." My blood ran cold. She knew. She knew I was here, knew I had witnessed the horror of her purchase. 100 questions clamored in my head, but one burned the brightest. Who was she, and what was she? "You'll have to forgive me," she continued, gliding towards me with a dancer's grace. "We don't usually have return customers. You mortals, so quick to crave change, yet so fragile when faced with its consequences." "Mortal!" The word echoed in my head with chilling implications. She laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, didn't you realize? That's what you all are to us. Playthings. Each of your precious lives is just a thread in a vast tapestry, and we," she gestured grandly around the room, "we are the ones privileged enough to pluck and adjust those threads." My stomach churned with a mix of dread and anger. "What do you want?" I managed to squeeze out, the words barely a whisper. "From you? Nothing anymore. You were a pawn, an example," she replied. A dismissive flick of her wrist made me feel less than an insect. But as thanks for your contribution, I can offer a hint. The reality auction is not about the prize. It never has been. It's about the cost. Her words hung heavy in the air. She turned to go, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Enjoy your new life, she purred, and a final terrifying truth dawned on me. There was no escape, no reversal. My impulsive bid had forever altered my fate. When the auctioneer's voice boomed once more, it was to an audience of one. I stood amidst sleek, ageless beings who saw our human realities as mere trinkets, and I understood. The warning on my invitation, the blood, my stolen decade. This was my punishment, my burden to bear. The story of the reality auction wasn't over. It was not for me or the countless unsuspecting mortals who would stumble, desperate and hopeful, into its glittering trap. I became a witness, a silent ghost haunting those halls, a cautionary tale forever woven into its dark fabric.